Welcome to another episode of the Prep Coach podcast. It's just you and me today.
It is.
No
Yeah.
MG.
No
It's
MG.
funny because last week you came in late. You had a
Yeah.
meeting. I think you maybe joined for the last 10 minutes or so. So this week, no MG at all. He's not going to be walking in at all.
No.
It's going to be us. And then next week, I believe I have an interview lined up, which I'm pretty excited about. So maybe the week after all three of us will be back.
Yeah.
But for now, it's just me and you. So I actually left a couple of questions that maybe we would need your help with. And I thought I'd probably just dive straight into the biggest one I got. If anyone can see this screen, there's a big long message here. So it's pretty big. But I will try to summarize it for you. Now, I did get you to read it so that you had all the details, but just for the listeners. So basically, this lady, she's wanting to get pregnant in future and potentially collect some eggs so that maybe later she has to do IVF. Now, she has competed and she's come off the back of that show. And it looks like from all the data that she's given, she's recovered pretty well. She's in a pretty good position. Maybe potentially could be gaining still a little bit more weight and on calories a little bit higher, but we'll go into that in a second. But she hasn't had her cycle for over 9 months after stopping the contraceptive pill that she was on.
Yeah.
So she hasn't got that back yet. Now she's wanting a little bit of information about, the doctor's given her recommendations of have a higher fat diet, do less training, less activity, so less stress on the body, those kind of things. But what she wants to do is actually compete next year again and then look at, fertility options after that point.
Yeah.
So she's looking for a little bit of guidance on what we would recommend to help with fertility and maybe some recommendations on should she be eating higher fats, lower fats, doing more exercise, less exercise, what she should be really doing. So I'll get you to dive into a little bit more. But I think one thing that I just think about in general, whenever you're talking about fertility, getting your cycle back, those kind of things, you kind of need to spend a fair bit of time in a surplus and making sure that your body is in the best position where it feels nice and comfortable and healthy to want to have a cycle and then even potentially get pregnant. But, you read through that big, long message. Is based on all that, is there anything that you'd recommend that she does or doesn't do?
Yeah. Well, firstly, I'm not a fertility specialist or an expert, far from it. But I guess some of the things to kind of unpack and tease out from that I took away from it, firstly, was she competed in 2024. She appears to be in a good spot. She ceased taking oral contraception, but equally, despite that, 9 months later, she doesn't have a cycle. And so from a physiological standpoint, her body doesn't feel comfortable enough yet to procreate. I think she had also done some fertility testing in there as well, which came back that she was on the lower end then there. So she was likely going to have to go down that path. But I think some of the things that you need to consider, well, firstly, when anyone's trying to have a baby, everyone thinks when you're younger, you're very naive. I know my wife and I were very much in that camp, and I was, despite being somewhat educated, you think that, you're going to start having kids, you just take away the goalie and then all of a sudden you get pregnant. That's how it works. And it's probably because when you're younger, you have the fear instilled in you that you need to have safe sex and be careful because if you get someone pregnant, but it's actually a lot more difficult than what you would think to actually hit the nail on the head at the right time, because and I've spent a lot of time looking into the menstrual cycle, and the one thing that I can take away from it is the most consistent thing about the menstrual cycle is its inconsistencies. And so because there's so much variance and it's so bespoke to each individual, and everyone is physiologically and endocrinologically different in terms of whether they do ovulate 1 month, whether they don't, the duration and all of things of that nature. And so if she doesn't have those hormones that she needs to have to be able to actually have a bleed, then she's not in a position at the moment to be able to conceive and have a baby. So if you were then looking at going down another process of entering into an extended period, she's a fitness competitor, of energy deprivation, you said that this girl, I don't know who this lady is, but you said she gets quite lean.
Yep.
With that, there's going to be some recoil. So the turnaround time to recover from that, just to get back to baseline, if you haven't already got your cycle back, we know, and we don't have heaps of research around this space, but one of the consistent things that we are seeing in a lot of the case study literature that's coming out, and a lot of it is on figure competitors, and that is that the time that it takes to get your cycle back is getting longer and longer, the leaner, which makes sense. The higher the quality of conditioning and the more extreme we take things to, the more recoil there's going to be. So I think if you were to go and do that, you're likely probably adding, potentially another year, maybe longer on top of what you're already going to be looking at. So I wouldn't be even remotely entertaining the idea of entering into a deficit until you do have that, until you do have your period back. Unless obviously you've spoken with your fertility specialist and they've said to you, the likelihood is that you may not, have a bleed, or you may not have a period. And if you are going to have to go and do IVF, then that's something that's completely different. So like all things, context is there, but contest prep, especially as we do get older, it does start to take its toll on our body, and especially for females. And as you get older, sex hormone production, same with males, it declines. And so they're things that you do need to factor in, that it's going to take some time, the older that you get, the more time it takes to recover. And if you haven't already had a baby yet, if that's something that's super important to you, for me, I would want to make sure I have complete transparency, speaking to your physician around, if I prep, these are the levels of extreme I'm going to go to. Is that going to be deleterious to my ability to conceive? And I would be pretty confident that they're going to say yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're going to say, if you want to have a baby, then you should be prioritizing that and not worrying about getting lean. Not to say that you can't do it, but you would already be geriatric at your age. And so the likelihood of complications and things happening are things that you need to factor in. At the end of the day, your body has to feel safe. And it's one thing to get pregnant, but it's another thing to then be able to, fulfill the entirety of the pregnancy. And unfortunately, sometimes, not even sometimes, it's very, very common now, to miscarriage. And so you want to make sure that you have complete transparency across all of it before you enter into a decision like that, because it's not really a loose decision. If you're 22 or 23 and you've got the next 12 years ahead of you to have babies and things of that nature, it's a different story. But given that you are getting on, towards your late 30s, there are considerations that you have to have.
So, would you say if she was adamant that she wanted to compete again before she had a child and she was looking at egg collection, would you say maybe do that first? So, get your cycle back, do a collection. Then, if you want to compete, at least you've collected eggs,
Mm-hmm.
and then you can compete. But even coming out of the prep, would she have to be in a position to get her cycle back to then do IVF to then fall pregnant again? She can't do that when she's just still recovering from a prep, right?
Yeah, pretty much. So she would want, and I'm guessing that all of her markers, the fact that the doctor that she's seeing now is telling her that he wants her to gain some weight and to reduce her expenditure. Looking at some of those intakes, and if we were to go off, I think she's around about 2,300 calories.
Yep.
She trains for about an hour and a half each week, and she trains for 5 days a week. If she's on 2,300 calories, and we work off a premise that, for an hour and a half session, she'd maybe be burning, 500 calories, maybe? Maybe.
Yeah.
So let's say that just for easy, clean math, it was that. So that then leaves her 500 calories, 7 days a week is 3,500 calories. So where I'm going with this is to see what her EA is, so her energy availability, which is the amount of energy that she has once exercise has been accounted for. So if we're going, she's having 2,300 times 7 is 16,100 minus 3,500 divided by 7, 1,800. So then what is her scale weight?
I think she said she
I know
was.
she had a scan. She said she thought she was around about.
Oh, she didn't say what her. Oh, okay. So her stage weight was 51, and she's
About
up 8 kilos up.
Okay.
So she's 59. That's 60 odd.
Okay, 60. And she didn't have a DEXA. She just did an in-body scan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So those things are shit. They don't give you any accuracy. So let's say that and you reckon she is reasonably lean?
Yeah. From the photos that I saw at her shows, yeah, she was reasonably lean. Yeah.
Okay, so at 60 kgs, where would you say that she's?
That's a photo over there.
Okay, yeah, so she's pretty sharp. So
Yeah.
at 60, so she's maybe, 16%, 15%? So 9 kilo. Well, if you work off that premise, that would have her, if that's what her body composition was, 15%, that's 9 kilos. So she's obviously a little bit bigger than that. So even if it was I don't know, say that her lean mass was like 47 kilograms. So if you went off that basis of 2100, so she hasn't, her EA is actually pretty good. So she's around that 40 kcal per kilogram of lean mass. So there's nothing there where she would be classified as, clinical low energy availability or even subclinical for that nature. At 40 to 45 is pretty decent, given what she's doing and given where her body weight is at. But I guess if you're and everyone is so different. If she's someone that does walk around a little bit leaner, and we know people that are in that camp, and I've actually had some recent conversations with them about their menstrual cycle, and equally was having the conversation that maybe you just need to see it a little bit higher and food needs to come up a bit more, and then hang out at that, even though you were thinking about running a tidy up, wait, and then literally within like a week or two just randomly came back. And then it's like once it's there, then it's a matter of now you need to hang out and keep it there for a while. Despite you might want to clean things up, you need to let your body know that energy is no longer compromised. So she sounds like she may be one of those people that once you do get it, and maybe you need to bring food a little bit higher, if that's what your physique's at. And without seeing photos, it's really hard to gauge like what does she look like now. If they want to send them through, I'm happy to have a look at them and give some feedback. But I wouldn't say that's crazy high food. Like, we've both got athletes that are females that have to push a decent amount of food in, and again need to be a little bit heavier to carry a cycle, and they're well and truly north of 27, 2800. And not that that's a badge of honor and that's what she's striving for. You want to be able to make the maximum amount of progress while in an ideal world just eating the amount that is comfortable and good for you. So yeah, by the sounds of it, I think she probably needs to push in a bit more food. I'd maybe push fats up a little bit more. Just if you struggle to get food in, you're only eating 50 grams of fat. Adding an extra 20 grams of fat would be pretty easy. It could be some almonds or some seeds or some nuts that you're not even really going to notice.
So maybe she's not really doing anything wrong. Maybe she just needs more time.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, she's been out of prep. When was it? From
I think it was last season.
The other outlier to that is when you've been on oral contraception for a long period of time, your body has not had to produce, like you've been putting a compound in your body to blunt your body releasing, certain hormones. So, and it's actually not that uncommon for a lot of women when they go from being on the pill to, it takes a bit of time to then go to actually have a period because you've put a synthetic hormone in your body for so long.
Yeah.
There's a period of time that it takes for your body to start producing that again. And again, there's no like blanket rule that it's 2 months, 3 months. Everyone's different.
Yeah. What's funny is I actually had a conversation with another client who competed in October last year. They got really lean. They were in fitness. They actually won their pro card. They did really, really well. And she's an older lady. And obviously, we're now back in the improvement season. We're putting weight back on. She's starting to feel a little bit uncomfortable, as most females do when they put weight on and they're not, back at their stage condition. But she hadn't got her cycle back. And I said, and she's like, oh, when can we do a fluff cut? And I was like, we need to hang out. We need to keep doing what we're doing. We need to give it time. And like what you said, and then when it comes back, give it more time. So she went to the doctor and told the doctor everything that's going on. And the doctor said, oh, look, at your age, you might not even get it back. You might be at that phase in your life, I wouldn't even worry about it. It's not even like a marker of health if you don't get your cycle back. And
how old is she?
I don't want to say her age,
okay.
But she's in that phase of her life, right?
Okay,
she
sure.
potentially could be in that phase of her life.
Of perimenopause.
Yeah. And I said to her, I was like, to be honest, I completely disagree with what he said. I was like, because you had your cycle before comp. Let's get it back. Let's at least try to get it back. It might be the biggest coincidence in the world that we're trying to get it back post-comp and you are in that phase and maybe you never get it back. It might be the biggest coincidence that those two things line up. I was like, but we need to at least try. So I was like, I actually disagree with him that we need to continue to keep trying. 2 weeks later, she got it back.
There you go.
So it was a big, like, okay, we can't just sit around and be like, oh, if I don't get it back, it's not a big deal. Sometimes it's an inconvenience, or I'm at that age where maybe I'm not going to get it back anymore and things like that. It's like, if you had it prior to comp and your comp was only, 6 months ago, you got to try. And I know it's uncomfortable and those kind of things, but you just got to try.
Yeah, 100%. I think there's a lot more awareness around that. I've actually got a bikini girl that I'm working with at the moment who's going to do 2026 season A next year. And funny enough, after about 7 months, she finally got her period. She got her period back in about month 3, but she hadn't had her cycle for almost 18 months after just bouncing around. Maybe not great coaches, super low food, and just by, again, being in a state of, I feel a bit uncomfortable pushing in this amount of food and, being in this position. And then after just recently finishing a tidy up phase, now being in arguably the best shape ever, didn't lose her cycle throughout. So sometimes you need to take one step backwards to take 4 or 5 steps forwards. Do you know what I mean? So, and equally the decision that you guys made in context to that lady, I don't know who that is, but 100% you would do that.
Yeah.
It's an easy throwaway. I wouldn't worry about it because they're going off probably what's in the screen. Yeah, technically you're in that category, so it's probably going to happen soon anyway. So don't worry about it.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, while we're talking about this, I thought it might be good to get an update from you about your research. And I know you sent out a post recently about getting some more female athletes to get involved.
Yeah, I did. So I'm recruiting, I guess, a second round of it. So I had to obviously I needed to recruit, and I'm very grateful for everyone that I got for the first bout for my thesis, which I submitted last year. But I actually got an extension with my supervisor because the study that I'm conducting, and she believes that and the way that we've controlled for everything, it is, without being biased, it is a very, very good, high caliber, very controlled, randomized study. And so there's no element of bias, the way that we've accounted for everything. But when we were calculating our G-power sample size, which is just a term for basically how many participants do you need in order for the type of study that you're doing to be warranted as, you had the right amount, versus if I was going to do a survey asking X amount of questions, I might need 1,000 participants or 10,000 in order to get something that's statistically significant. And so my G-power calculation was 35 participants that I needed. And so I got 17 for the first half, which I obviously got data on and submitted for my thesis. But we've extended that to try and get those last 18 so that we can put it all together. And then the plan is to submit it to a journal. Funnily enough, I actually just finished, my supervisor just signed off on my manuscript for a systematic review that I wrote last year, which we're going to push for journal submission. We're actually going to submit it on Thursday. It may get knocked back, it may not. So that process is going to start too.
That's awesome.
But yeah, there's such a wide scope in this space because females are so underrepresented in sports science. And so in this area in particular, like in my study, there's only 2 other studies, and even the sample sizes that they had, and they ran a little bit different studies, but they were randomized and they were looking at the effects of carbohydrate. They had 6 and 9 participants. So my first one, I had 17, and then obviously recruiting the next 18, it will just ensure that, whichever journal we go to, that we do have, some good numbers behind us.
So who do you need? What type of people do you need? Do they need to be local as well?
Yeah, so I had a lot of people reach out who are like, I'm in Adelaide or I'm in Queensland. I had someone from New Zealand. I was like, unfortunately, you need to be in Victoria. It's a 2-month period. So you just need to be eumenorrheic, which means that you don't have any of those symptoms that we were just speaking about before. So that you have a regular cycle. You resistance train for, I think, 3 to 4 times a week. I think it was the bare minimum that I listed it as. And then you need to be between the ages of 18 and 40.
Yep.
And not taking oral contraception. And then basically what happens is you will either be allocated the intervention or the habitual conditions when you first start in. So basically, once you've been onboarded, we get you in, we do some measurements, and then basically as soon as you get your period, you notify me. You'll be notified then if you're in the habitual group or the intervention. If you're habitual, you basically just do a food recall. You just send photos of what you're eating. Give me the exact. Bodybuilders are so great because they know exactly how much. So it makes it really easy for me to calculate nutritics.
Yeah.
And then we test you. So going through some muscular endurance testing with a percentage of deadlift, percentage of bench press, and a leg press. And then the next month we get you in again in that early follicular phase. So from when you commence your bleed, same time. So it's standardized, but this time under a high carbohydrate intervention, and you follow that plan, and then we compare the two.
How are things looking so far with the last group that you had? Like,
So I'm not inclined to want to share that information purely because there may be bias of like, if I'm in this group, there wasn't an effect, or there actually is. So I've actually blinded the competitors. So afterwards, once they've completed their second bout, they're like, did I do better or worse? Because Most of them don't even remember. There was only one lady who remembered what she got. She just remembered, I got this on this one, I got this on that one. Because I don't want them to be like, say you're doing a bench press, I got 13 last time, I'm coming in, I want to get 15.
Yeah.
And equally, that's why it's randomized. So I had some people come in and do the carbohydrate intervention first,
Mhm.
and then on the second time, they came in under habitual conditions. But once I've wrapped everyone up, because I just don't want anyone
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I get
potentially
it. I get it.
jeopardize my
Yeah, I get it.
my data. But yeah, it's really interesting. And yeah, so if you are someone that does fit that criteria, if you don't follow the Prep Coach Podcast Instagram or my Instagram, it's Scotty_Powerhouse. I've got a post up with the criteria there. If you're interested, you can send me a DM or just comment on it, and I'll flick you all the information.
Awesome. All right, let's move on. Similar vein of direction of questioning, but how do you gauge how a client is looking in the off season, and do you decide when a mini cut you should do a mini cut, or do you go based on whether the client wants to or not, or should they just keep building? So, I guess, how do you know when to do one? Should you do one? Is it based on the client asking? Is it based on the coach wanting? When and why would you do one in off season?
So mini cuts. Firstly, I'll preface by saying that in the improvement season, we want a mini cut as infrequently as possible because we want to be in a state of positive energy availability so that we are in a position to be able to acquire new tissue. So we don't want to be dieting all the time, and equally, we will also want to embrace sometimes being a bit heavier, being maybe a bit softer, because it's that physique that allows us to do things in the gym and hit certain numbers and be able to train at certain intensities that we otherwise wouldn't if we were lower in composition or body weight. So they're things that we need to factor in. But the main one would be that we've hit our ceiling of where we feel the composition is lying. And everyone's different, but for females, I usually don't like to drift too much further in the improvement season, beyond maybe 25% of body weight, 25% of body weight, because we start to get heavier. Granted, there are exceptions to the rule. I've got a female that funny enough, I had her check in earlier this morning, and she is significantly above where she was in contest prep, but equally, I took her on very late and she had a really, really bad prep in the lead up to that. But had we not have done that, and equally I'm looking at some of those other markers longitudinally, looking after their health and well-being, I know that, and equally she reports every week, no desire to eat, so hard to get my food in. I know that when the time does come for us, and even though based on that ceiling, she's right around the mark of where we could, but equally we're just, maybe 100 grams plus or minus every week for the last 5 weeks. And it will be like that probably the next 2 months. And then I know when we do run a cleanup phase, it'll be easy to pull off like 6-7 kilos in no amount of time at all.
Yep.
And sometimes you get people that are hyper responders, say someone like a TMG, who he could be sitting maybe 16 kilos or 17 kilos or even 20 above stage weight. You could run a 6-week fat loss phase and pull off 10 kilos like that.
Yeah.
It's not an arduous task to do that. So I think you have to really know your athlete, but composition ceiling is one of them. And the other one would be just, the desire to eat again. Because sometimes, it's like where you can't get food in anymore. And so sometimes it's just about resensitizing hunger signaling and getting that desire to want to eat again. And also you may have run into a situation where numbers in the logbook are no longer, body weight isn't really moving much. You're not seeing any real improvement, and not seeing any improvement for say maybe 5 or 6 weeks. You're kind of stagnated. Not like I've gone 2 weeks in a row and I didn't go up in load or volume. I think sometimes people are in too much of a hurry to just exit because it gets a bit uncomfortable being heavier.
Yeah. You said 25%. Was that above stage weight or body fat percentage, or what did you?
Above
Above
stage
stage weight. Yeah, I thought that's what you said.
Yeah, for sure.
I'll read the next question, but I think we just answered it. How many kgs are your clients usually above stage weight in the off season? Have you had clients start prep with less than 10 kilos to lose? Depends on everyone, but especially when we talk about pre-prep phases, and normally we'll have someone in that position where they don't have to lose 25 kilos or whatever it needs to be, or 20% above their stage weight.
Yeah, and I've kind of pivoted a little bit, I guess, over the last probably 2 years in terms of, maybe not getting too far, like not stressing so much. If someone is a bit north of where we would perhaps like them to be, but that we're going to pre-prep in 6 months, for the sake of running a tidy up and then, having to come back up again and having a dieting bout, and then you're going to go and do another lengthier dieting bout, I'll usually try and tie it in, and I'll always reverse engineer back so that when my pre-prep phase is, I'll know, okay, so say for example, like the guys that are doing season C this year, a couple of my physique and classic guys who were probably 17-ish kilos above where their stage weight's going to be throughout the improvement season. And and being like, I feel like maybe we need to tidy up, but I'm like, we're going to run a pre-prep. And during that time, it was about an 8 to 9 week period. We pull off 11-ish, 12-ish kilos. So you pull off a decent amount and then gradually come back up. And then they're starting prep and they're going to have to lose, maybe 9 kilos.
Yep.
And equally, in a good spot, hunger is still in a good space. There's none of those, prep related perturbations that you see when you're starting to really think about food. And when you finish prep, you could gain 5 kilos, but you still have some of those food seeking behaviors and some of the disruption to sleep and things like that. So I think sometimes you just need to factor in, a lot of it is periodization and knowing your athlete and how quickly can I turn them around. And if I do press play on this fat loss phase there, that then means that the next 4 weeks after that, we're bringing food back up. And then you want a holding phase. And if you work off a basis of, if we're dieting, like with a pre-prep, however long I pre-prep for, I want to make sure that I have at least 1 to 1.5 times in terms of the week duration.
That was going to be my next question.
Before we'll start a contest prep. So all these guys finished up around about end of December, some of them early January. And then as a result of that, some of them have just started. But equally, it's not as invasive. And then some of the other ones won't start till closer to April because we did a lot of really good work in the pre-prep phase. And they're in a position where they're just trickling weight up 100 grams, 150 grams each week. So they're in a position where they can still acquire new tissue, but they're not drifting too far from where we need them to be.
So if a pre-prep is like, say, 8 weeks, then it's going to be 10 to 12 weeks in between the end of the pre-prep and the start of the prep itself.
Yeah, because the first 4 weeks coming out of it, I'm not just going, all right, you might have had someone who had been sitting on, say, 3,000 calories prior to that. Let's say that you go aggressive, you drop them down to 2,000. I'm not, once the prep phase, the pre-prep's done, I'm going straight back to 3,000. I'll gradually close them out, the deficit. We might bring them up to, say, 2,400 or 2,500 for week 1. Yep, we only dropped about 150 grams. Cool. Let's go up another 200 calories. We maintain this week. All right, cool. Let's go up another 150 calories, whatever it may be. And then you just want to allow enough time to also see that gradually start to rise again. And also factoring in that then gives them some time to enjoy a meal out each week with a partner, not feel as restricted with food. And the process is a lot more enjoyable. That was the approach that I took in my last prep, and I found it so much easier.
Yeah. So what would you say the rate of gain is after a pre-prep between that and the start of comp prep? Is it a 1.25% a week? Is it a 0.5% a week rate of gain?
So initially once that's done, you'll still usually see a reduction in the first week because we're closing that gap.
Yep.
So for the first, I'll then usually see it's probably a week to 10 days before we start to see us come back to where we're no longer seeing a drop and now we're just sort of maintaining. And then from there, rate of gain will usually be around about 0.2 to 0.3% of body weight, usually 0.25%.
Yep.
But you might have some weeks where it might jump 0.5, and the neek week you might not see any response. So
perfect. Yeah, that's the same as what I use. Yeah, about 0.25 on average, week on week during the 2 phases.
Yeah.
And then in the pre-prep, is it a 1% rate of loss and above? It's pretty aggressive.
It usually just depends on the athlete. So with a lot of my guys that I know, if they're carrying a bit of muscle, but they're also carrying a bit of body fat, and I know that I can dig them and they've been well fed for 8 months to 10 months, then the first week is probably 2%. The next week's probably 1.5 to 2%. The week after that, we're probably running 1.5%. We're looking at, close to a kilo, depending on how, whether they're 80, 90 or 100 kilos. Per week. But around about that first couple of weeks, roughly 2%. And when you factor in glycogen, fluid and food volume, you're going to see that anyway.
Yeah.
And then from there, it's usually between that, 1 to 1.5. But also, I'm keeping an eye on things in terms of where is libido marker at, where are hunger and satiety levels at, where is sleep at, mood, irritability, things like that. If they're all good and you've got green lights, then there's no point being overly conservative because I know that I'm also going to have time to put food back in and to have them, ready to rock again. Again, you're usually pulling down if you can, and I like to, if I can get close to around about 10% off stage weight, maybe even sometimes slightly under, just because it's also for me, it's a proxy to gauge all right, I thought we were going to be here, but in actual fact, we actually have a little bit more to go, or maybe we're actually not going to need to go down as low as I thought. And that helps to inform this is where our stage weight's going to be, or where we think it's going to be now, a little bit more accurately. And then from there, you can reverse engineer checkpoint, 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 and so on.
Yeah. So, post that for the actual comp prep itself, are you still having a 25, 26 or more week comp prep?
Depends on the individual. So for most of the guys, it still is between 24 to 26, depending on where they're starting from. One of my fitness guys who had competed previously, but found it a bit more challenging to get to the level of conditioning you need to get to. We've allowed 28 weeks for him. One of my other guys who has done the dance before and knows what it feels like, he's around that, I think 24 or 25, but equally he's in a good spot. And the reason I still like to allow for that is because we usually go hard out of the gates early whilst we can because we're fresh, we're enthusiastic.
Yeah.
But then blocking out time to be able to have, maybe there's an extra 1 or 2, diet breaks in there that weren't originally planned. Maybe you're reverting from your dieting intervention earlier and you can run, 3 down, 4 ups a little bit more regularly and just also protect the experience, but also how they're feeling throughout, because gone are the days now, I think, where we should be digging athletes to the stage and they just limp to the finish line. They're doing shitloads of cardio versus a lot of these competitors and the athletes that I work with, they've done the dance before. So they know what it's like to experience the suck. And so it's better for them sometimes to just, they're okay being in close proximity 6 weeks out, but just taking their time, still having some cognitive function rather than having to run it right up to the end, and also taking out cardio and things like that.
Sure. Yeah. So, based on if they have a long season, so say there's like 6 weeks between their first show and their last show, are you trying to hit the mark on the first show? Or if it's a long season, you're maybe trying to be like, okay, first show, maybe you're about a couple of percent off where we really want to be. The last show is where we're going to make sure we hit and is that where you set the 26-week mark, 24-week mark at the last show or at the first show?
Yeah, good question. So funnily enough, there actually is a couple of those situations where the WMBF show is the 6th of September. It's the first week. And I've got an athlete that has marked, I've got 2 athletes we've marked that in. And both of them are going to be probably in that mix of contending for, top placings. And given that they're offering a pro card there, it's a conversation where you need to factor into, we want to go and do that, but equally knowing that we've got some big shows at the back end. And so the answer to that is we probably won't. Well, they want to, but we'll probably get to have the final say, and we'll be leaning towards not quite trying to shoot for the stars on the first one, because I also know that there's a 3-week hiatus between their next show.
Yeah.
And then there's like 4 or 5 back to back, and then traveling overseas. So, I don't always love putting people on at 90 or 95%, but I think when you're talking about a long season where if you're ready to rock, like inside out, nothing left to shift in September, and your last show is going to be
Bali
in the first
or whatever.
The Olympia,
Or
the first week of November.
Yeah.
You're in for a shitty October and November. So I think you need to be really intentional in mapping out your shows, and then also you don't have to set that in stone. The art of coaching is knowing and having the ability to auto-regulate and making adjustments and being able to pivot. We can have the best intentions, but it very rarely just all goes beautifully, and you never not get turbulence. So it's about knowing, okay, well, what are our plans? What are we going to do on this occasion? And I think the shows now are pretty packed in. That's really the only outlier. They're pretty close together now from the end of September. So it does make it a little bit easier. That's probably the only real outlier. But those that are wanting to go overseas, because those top shows in Australia are in that early October period, you kind of have to still be hitting your mark.
Yeah.
And you want to hit your mark, I think, say like at an NBA or an ICN Vic show, you want to have a good idea of being pretty close to on the money so that you can get feedback from the judges and then pivot. Maybe you need to come in fuller, maybe you need to come in, a little bit sharper, things like that, so that you can make adjustments, versus if you're like, oh, we're not quite at 100%, so we'll be fine. Well, you haven't really presented. They're not assessing you on your 100%, so how do you know that that's exactly going to be what they want the next time around?
It's really hard because obviously there's only so many weekends
Yeah.
that you can put shows on. And then when you do have a WMBF, which is a newly coming to Victoria, and they're going to offer pro cards, and it's at the start of September, you're like, far out. And you're trying to get someone to shoot for a pro card mid-October as well. It makes it difficult.
Yeah, well, they have that Vic show, and that was what appealed to me into two of these athletes. And one of my, he's actually flying in from overseas to do this show. But then you've got to get the WMBF Nationals, I think is...
Oh, geez, I don't remember when it is. Is it early October?
Got it in my phone.
Or is it late September? I'm not too sure.
I think it might be... I can tell you in real time because it'll be... But yeah, they're things that you really have to think about.
Well, if you have someone that goes to their Vic show and gets their pro card, they're most likely not going to go do nationals, right?
No,
because there's no pro show there anyway. So it's like they're one and done with that federation unless they miss it out and they want to go up to Queensland and try to get it done.
Yeah. So the WMBF is on the 4th
of October.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So it's a week before before the NBA Nationals. It's a week before.
Yeah, and that's in Brisbane.
Yeah. Okay. There's a lot of big shows in October, and obviously, and that's the way it is, right? All the lead up is in September. All the state shows are in September. All the national shows are in October, and then you've got the international shows that are end of October, start of November. Yeah. So there's a lot going on.
Yeah. Well, that's the same weekend as the ICN Vics.
That's right. They're nationals. Yeah.
The 4th, 5th.
Yeah.
That's their big show.
That's their big show
because the nationals is on the same weekend as ours.
That's right.
12th.
Yeah.
So, yeah, interesting.
All right, let's wrap up on this one. When in prep and your strength starts to diminish, does this mean that you are starting to lose muscle as the load is declining? So
when you're in prep,
and your strength is diminishing, so you're obviously using less load, are you losing muscle during that time?
Sometimes it's a matter of moving mass, and depending on the movement, like if you're trying to, a big compound that involves axial loading, like a squat or something, maybe you just don't have the body weight behind you to be able to move that kind of weight. I think strength as a proxy is something that you should be definitely looking to protect because your training performance is, in all honesty, for me, is the number one indicator for fat-free mass retention, because you've got to give your body a reason to hang on to, tissue that is metabolically active, albeit not, greatly metabolically active, but it is nonetheless compared to fat mass. But we do need to ensure that if you're at the back end and when you are leaner, and that's where sometimes I think doing lots and lots of volume I tend to go the opposite way. Sometimes less volume, but let's see if we can still move heavy things relative to, and again, being, very specific with exercise selection that doesn't, bang us up too bad. Maybe if you're squatting, you're picking, maybe it's a pendulum squat versus, say, you don't have to put heaps and heaps of load on that compared to a back squat or to a hack squat, and you don't get that same systemic fatigue. And same with the, maybe you pull off the floor for a deadlift, maybe you move to just an RDL because it's a little bit more friendly and less systemically taxing. So, I mean, you want to protect it at all costs, but at the end of the day, as your body weight's going down and you're eating less, at the end of the day, you are in a suboptimal environment trying to do everything optimally.
Yeah, of course. So would you say that the best thing that you can really do is just make sure that you're training with intensity, regardless of whatever the load is? If it goes down because you're getting weaker, so be it. But as long as you are pushing those sets as hard as you can.
Yeah, and I also think it's important to include top sets as well as back off sets rather than just the whole 12 to 15 reps, because if you're working within a lower volume range, you're usually going to be able to lift more load in order to meet those rep demands. So I think if you're doing, for most exercises, if they're big compounds, sometimes for me, it's literally only, it might be, if someone's still deadlifting, it might be like one set of 5 to 6, or it could be, if it was an RDL, one set of 5 to 6 and a back off set of maybe 8 to 10 or 8 to 12, whatever it may be, if it's an RDL. So I think they're the things that you probably want to lean into. And as you said, just keep intensity high, because intensity retains density.
That's the one. So for you, was there any lift that you would see the effects of strength diminishing a little bit? For me, it was RDLs, to be honest. Everything else was pretty good still. I was still able to push pretty hard. Towards the end, it was lat pull down, got me a little bit. But I know that towards the end of my prep, I was losing a little bit of tissue, I could see. So, but I saw it in the RDLs and I saw it in the lat pull down.
And then did you notice towards the back ends of your workouts as well that sometimes were there exercises that perhaps you would have ordinarily been able to perform well at, but you noticed that you would fade as a means of less energy, maybe?
Yeah, of course. Like, yeah, your tank's only so big, and your tank's not really full during prep, of course. But I still like pushed as hard as I could. Like I was a bit mental.
Yeah.
So I just pushed, I just did what I could. Just, as I said, intensity, just tried to keep the intensity up as the best I possibly could. And but yeah, I did notice the weight drop a little bit on those two specifically. Was there any for you that?
Yeah, well, on the lat pull down, for example, that makes sense. If you think about your pinned into a seat, as your body weight goes down, you've got an opposing force that's trying to pull you up during that eccentric portion. So you have to not only resist that, you're having to work a lot harder eccentrically because there's less body weight to pin you down. So for me, yeah, I mean, I tend to I like to keep in a stiff leg deadlift pulling off the floor. For me, it's just, even though the dieting and all that stuff, everyone finds that hard, which it is, but I like the idea of knowing that I'm doing something that's really, really hard that maybe most wouldn't want to do. And for me, it's that ability of knowing that if I can still pull, like I'll usually have something where I want to be able to still pull maybe, I don't know, 210 or 220 off the floor for 4 or 5 reps. And I refuse to want to do that. It's very rare that I can still hold that, but normally at the back end, I'd maybe see a 7 to 10% decline in the amount of load, but equally, it's all relative. So if I'm 100 kilos and I'm pulling X amount for however many reps, if I'm 82 or 85 kilos and I'm pulling only 10 kilos less, pound for pound, I'm a lot stronger at that weight.
Yeah, 100%.
And that's the thing that I noticed that in prep, I'm a lot stronger relative to body weight.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're the same.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, there was some weights that I was moving when I was like low 80s kg. I was like, this is pretty good for my weight. This is 100%. Pretty good.
Yeah. And that's something that I think a lot of people just don't lean into enough. They just use that I'm eating less, I'm tired. And a lot of the time, what you tell yourself, the conversations that you have with yourself during, before, after, leaning before you train, leaning into that, parasympathetic branch of the nervous system to just really go in and get after it.
Awesome. I'll wrap it up. That was good. Just you and me. As I said, next week, most likely interview. The week after, all 3 of us.
TMG returns.
Done. Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening. We'll chat soon.